So, how do you break down an OTS? And what is an OTS? An OTS is an open team sheet. So if you're playing in Pokemon VGC, you're going to be noticing that you're going to be seeing teams like this in a team list. And within these teams, you're going to see items, abilities, terra types, movesets. And you'll see that this on your opponent's side. Your opponent will also see yours, but they will not have access to your effort values or any of your Pokemon stats, so they won't be able to do any damage calculations or any useful damage calculations, because they have to assume what your stats are for your Pokemon. So why do I want to go over this? Because I think as someone who's just starting out myself, it's not really spoken about a lot. Like, how do you use this information? What are you supposed to do with this information? How is it effective? How are you going to be able to kind of pick up on these things, and what should you do, and how do you decompose someone's team? So I have I would like to think it's mainly a 3-step process, with probably potentially number 4 being like a bonus one. But number 1 is obviously quite simple. Weaknesses. So when I say weaknesses, I want to make this very clear. You want to look at your opponent's weaknesses, because there will be a step afterwards where we might look at your own team's weaknesses. But your weaknesses of the opposition, I do apologize for my typing. I'm using mouse. But so steel type is here, and fire. So let's just do steel and fire and fighting. This is the same. So these two have the same. So that's steel, fire, fighting as well. This is fire, fighting, and fairy. I will just try and make a discrepancy for these ones a little bit if they are the same. So give me bear with me for a second. So that's fighting, and then that's fighting, and then this one is ghost. Annihilate is ghost and also fairy, and then also psychic. So this is kind of where I want you to go over someone's team. I do have some sample teams. Well, I've sent a link to the tournament I was in, so you can take a look at not only my team but some the people I compete against. I did finish 24th in that tournament for free. I didn't make it to top cut, unfortunately, but it was against 90 other people, so I did relatively well. And it's just from that experience what I picked up on, and things that I thought that was super important when going through this process. Indeedee, weak to dark type moves, and also bug. So once you go over the opponent's weaknesses, you want to find a common type. So this was going to be dark and ghost. But yes, so as you can see here on the team, fighting type occurs 3 times, which I believe is the highest number of times it occurs. So we have fighting type as a weakness, as a common weakness. We have fairy type as a common weakness. We have steel type as a common weakness, and we have ghost. So, and dark. So we have quite a lot of common weaknesses, and I think this game in general, you'll find a lot of common weaknesses, not only because of just how teams are built and how the metas are kind of centralized around certain compositions, but because of the fact that we can terrestrialize, which basically means effectively getting rid of your weaknesses by changing your Pokemon's type. That's why you see lots of teams like double up and triple up on certain weaknesses, because they can be covered by the new game mechanic. So also we do happen to see steel there as well. So there's quite a lot of weaknesses our opponent has on their team, but there's something to take note of. So steel and dark, and for my team I have a Goldengo. So Goldengo is, I choose, after finding the opponent's weaknesses, I choose only one, and I made this very clear. I choose only one Pokemon. I choose only one Pokemon because then it gives me a feel for what my opponent bring based on this one Pokemon. That's the next step, and then we can kind of build a team around the team that's already been built, in a sense. So you have 6, you can only take 4 into a battle. So then number 2, and I call number 2 just help. Help just means any Pokemon that can facilitate the current Pokemon in question. So Goldengo is the current Pokemon in question, that will be going against this team. We then choose certain Pokemon that will help that. And like I said, Goldengo is very good against Abomasnow, Titan, Armroot, and Annihilate, which means that but also is weak to the Annihilate and the Meowscarada. These 2 Pokemon that I've just mentioned, Impink are both super effectively weak to a fairy type. And this is where you start building compositions where they synergize together. So I actually have a Sylveon on my team. Quite fitting to actually have pink for fairy type. But yeah, so Sylveon is then the next Pokemon on my team because it covers for those 2 weaknesses. Having said that, this is where it gets interesting, because then you need to think about the next step is really to go back to step 2, where help is just identifying the weaknesses of my own Pokemon and seeing which Pokemon can facilitate that. And we'll do the same for Sylveon. Sylveon is weak to steel moves and poison moves. Our opponent doesn't have any Pokemon with steel or poison type moves. Everything is neutral, and they don't have any Pokemon which are steel or poison. So that's quite good and works in our favor. Nor do they have any terror types or anything like that that really affects Sylveon. So that's something to take note of. It is resistant. Fire types do resist fairy type moves, so it's likely to see the Arm Rouge, potentially the Sylveon, but it won't present itself as a massive issue, but just something to take note of. So when I go back to step 1 and 2, I think to myself, if Goldengo's coming, who would you bring? If Sylveon's coming, if Goldengo's coming, who would you bring? Who stops that? Then I'm like, Sylveon does. And then who stops Sylveon is the next question. And to be honest, there's quite a few things. Sylveon having access to Hyper Voice Wide Guard is very effective. And then if that's the case and Arm Rouge does resist all of Sylveon's hits, then you could safe to assume that Arm Rouge could be coming. And this is where step 3 comes in, where it's like pairings. Pairings are important because you want to know, like, if you don't know your opponent's team, you kind of want to guess in a way who's coming, and you can cover for many things. Like, well, the first 2 steps are really covering for your opponent's team based on the weaknesses, and obviously using those metrics we can work out who to bring. But then you need to think of pairings. If your opponent knows that they're weak to steel types, they're likely to bring Arm Rouge. And if they bring Arm Rouge, who are they likely to bring? Then the answer to that question really is going to be Indeedee. Indeedee, because the psychic terrain, which means it powers up the expanding force, so that is a pairing. So Titan Abomasnow is definitely a pairing because of the ability Slush Rush. And then you see that the Annihilate and the Meowscarada they do pair well in the sense that they cover certain weaknesses, but they're both weak to Fairy and they don't really cover each other as well as you'd like to think. So that wouldn't be a pairing per se. You would have these as additional Pokemon. So you're not always going to bring double pairs. You could bring a pair and one of the other pairs, and then one single one, which is a singular one over here. You could just there's so many different ways to run this team. You could do Abomasnow, Titan, Indeedee, and then Annihilate. So you have Follow Me to stop any ghost type moves hitting the Annihilate, and because you're immune to it because you're a normal type, it won't hit you either. So there's multiple ways to run a team, and that's kind of where you want to be thinking about. So you want to identify the pairings, and once you identify the pairings, you then want to think to yourself, if they're bringing this pair, who should I bring? And this goes back to what your team weaknesses are. So my team weaknesses are, I have 2 dragon types, so let's think about it. So we have 2 dragon types with Dragonite, Hydreigon. I have 1 flying type and ghost type, flying dark type. I have 1 ghost steel. I have 1 fairy type, and then I have a Raichu, which is electric. So my team is weak to ice types. We see that the dragon type and the flying type is weak to ice types. So it's likely to think that the opponent brings the Abomasnow inside Titan. How we cover for this? Goldengo is obviously our first Pokemon we chose. Sylveon also covers for Goldengo's weaknesses. That's fine. So if they assume that I'm bringing my dragon types, they could bring in these Pokemon here. They do have a Dazzling Gleam, which is where I want to take note of moves now being effective. And if Dazzling Gleam is going to be effective against my dragon types, then you'd think the Indeedee is coming. So a potential team composition, and I'm going to just clear everything off the board right now for a second. I will write down some stuff again later. One easy 4 that opponent could bring is Abomasnow, Titan, Indeedee, and Arm Rouge. So obviously I already mentioned Goldengo coming on my team, I mentioned Sylveon coming on my team, and then I need to look, if this is a potential 4, who do I bring? The remaining 2. It's inevitable that my team has to bring something weak to ice, because 3 of the remaining 4 Pokemon are going to be weak to ice, and I have to bring 2 more. So statistically it's impossible for me not to bring something not weak to ice. So if that's the case, we need to think about how my Pokemon does against this. So both these Pokemon are weak to Dark type. Initially I think Hydreigon. Hydreigon is a good Pokemon. It's got the Assault Vest, it's got the ability to live certain moves. It should be the Pokemon I'd be bringing, because I don't think Dragonite does as well in this matchup, and being ×4 weak to Ice type is not really helpful, so that would force the Terror. Don't get me wrong, this Hydreigon would also force the Terror, but if it's against the Indeedee and the Arm Rouge, I don't think Dazzling Gleam should do that much because I'm Assault Vested. But I won't go too much into calcs, just wanted to go over like a team composite, like choosing your team. So yeah, we've broken this down, we've chosen the 4. Once we've chosen the 4, we choose our additional Pokemon, and then now we're left with our 4th one, which is, you're thinking to yourself, well I am, in the sense that this team has Slush Rush, it also has Trick Room, so it has 2 modes of speed control really, and I think I don't have any speed control, I don't know what to expect, and I think a safe bet for me would be to bring in the Murkrow, because the Murkrow can not only hit both the Indeedee and the Arm Rouge for super effective damage using Foul Play, it is immune to Expanding Force, so it's a good switch-in option, and also it has access to Tailwind. Since it's priority, if I see the Abomasnow and the Psychitan come in, I could Tailwind with the Murkrow, bring in the Goldengo, use Make It Rain, which forces a Terror typing from one of my opponent's Pokemon, and then we kind of know that if we have the Indeedee and Arm Rouge at the back, it's very difficult for my opponent to break down my Hydreigon, which I bought as my additional Pokemon, along with the Sylveon, to carve out that win, because I have either the option to Terror type the Sylveon, which means I hit the Arm Rouge for super effective damage, or I have the ability to bring in my Hydreigon, which does super effective damage against my opponent, because of the fact that I have Dark Pulse and it will hit both the opponent's Pokemon for super effective damage. So that's kind of how my process is. My process really is identify. So one is obviously, like I said, weaknesses, so opponent's weaknesses. So weaknesses is the first one. I do apologize for my writing, I am using the mouse like I said earlier. So you want a weakness for the opponent. You 2 want to choose, so after 1 you've done that and you've chosen your first Pokemon. 2 is the help. Who's the help on your team? Who's facilitating your current Pokemon, your current single Pokemon that you have? And then 3 is, what are your weaknesses and what do you expect your opponent to bring? Once you identify these, I think this is a good way to kind of getting started and knowing that what Pokemon to bring against your opponent, because you know what they might bring. It's a best of 3 format, so you do have the opportunity to make some mistakes, in the sense that you could lose your first game and win the other 2. That happened to me actually during my first tournament. There was a lot of games where I lost the first match, but by losing the first game I got a lot of information, and using that information I was able to make better decisions based on this 3-step process. And obviously once you go into the second game, you don't really need to do the 3-step process again, because you already know your opponent's weaknesses. But you might think, if they bought in the Psychitan and Abomasnow and it didn't work, they might start instead with a different pairing of Indeedee, Arm Rouge. They could start with an odd pairing of Abomasnow and Masquerada. They might start with something fast so it can put damage on me, and then set up an Aurora Veil. So you got to really think about, like, usually you think, when I think of Pokemon, it's, unless it's a super hyper offensive team, it's normally support besides a Pokemon that wants to take out your opponent's Pokemon. That's kind of where the idea is when you go into doubles, but there are cases where that isn't the case, but you could potentially even see, I think even one of my matches, and I will be post-commentating and explaining my thought process in the games I had in the tournament in a different video, but I think there was one game where I saw an Arm Rouge and Meowscarada starting. That was kind of cool, that was quite interesting to see. A bit more of an offensive way to start, but it does have supporting moves in the fact that it has Wide Guard, so if I did want to bring out the Goldengo, or if I wanted to bring out the Sylveon, Hyper Voice would be protected by Wide Guard. So things like that you need to really think about. I hope this was a good video, an informative video to help you break down team lists and what you should be thinking about. It really was something that I struggled with, and I think now, since I've participated in a tournament, done relatively well, and obviously been practicing with other people and seeing other people's teams, this is how I've gone about breaking down people's teams and just thinking about what I would bring. there will probably be future episodes if you guys enjoy like this seminar type format. I really enjoy doing stuff like this. It's really not only informative, but I like teaching people, so something I would take into consideration doing in future. Didn't want it to be super long. I know I might have dragged out a little bit, but I hope you guys enjoyed. If you can like, comment and subscribe to my channel, that would be greatly appreciated. And this is MS23 signing off.